Welcome to False Flag Weekly News, the weekly news show that not only tells you what happened this week with the 30 biggest stories or most interesting ones, but also puts it into historical or even philosophical, perhaps even spiritual, occasionally, context. I'm Kevin Barrett with E. Michael Jones, editor of Culture Wars magazine. Hey, Mike, great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, good to be back, Kevin.
All right. So let's see. We have to get through our obligatory disclaimers, I guess, first, our introductory slideshow. So let's first say we question everything here at False Flag Weekly News. And if you can't handle questioning everything, you should be watching something else. Last week, I suggested cat videos. This week, I don't know. What's even more harmless than cat videos? I don't know. Other furry animals, I guess. But if you like to find out the terrible red pill truth about what's really going on, stay here. Don't touch that dial, folks. And if you want to know where you can watch us, even if we get deplatformed, which is not entirely unlikely these days, make sure you get on our email list, ffwn@noliesradio.org. Just send an email with join in the subject line. We'll put you on the list, keep you apprised of where we broadcast from. All right, so let's get to it here. The illusion of freedom quote from Frank Zappa. That's kind of how things look. Especially, it looks pretty grim if you're an atheist like Frank Zappa. But if you're not, if you're a theist, if you believe God has a plan for your life, like E. Michael Jones does, and as I do in my own way, is that our next slide? No, our first slide is about the despair you would feel if you didn't think God had a plan for your life and you were recently unemployed in the worst job loss since the Great Depression, 10 times more than the previous unemployment record of 1.96 million set in September 1945. It's a 14.7. That's like a football halftime score. Usually unemployment is baseball scores. We're in new territory here. This is terrible, Mike. How can people possibly handle this?
Well, they're not handling it. That's the whole point of that little video and little thing I did is I think people are locked down. All they're getting is bombarded with bad news, and they're starting to react. They can't stand it. And so I was taking a walk, and I'm crossing the LaSalle Street Bridge in South Bend, and a black woman comes up to me, and she says, "Do you have a cell phone? I need to call my mama. I'm going to kill myself." And she hops over the railing of the bridge and stands there on the ledge. I think this is the way people are feeling now. They can't stand it. I mean, man is a social animal. As Aristotle said, solitary confinement is a punishment because you're being deprived of your ability to associate with fellow human beings. And this is precisely what's happening during this lockdown here. Which varies from state to state, but is having bad effects on everyone, including this poor lady.
Yeah, if you add up all of the bad effects, you know, that the kind of shock to the system of being distanced from other people, don't get close, certainly don't touch anybody, stay 6 feet away, stay inside your house, don't get any fresh air or sunshine, et cetera, et cetera. And then the economy completely crashes, so you're totally stressed out. And then, you know, as many as 250 million people are threatened with starvation worldwide. It really does look like the lockdown may be inflicting a lot worse damage than the virus itself.
Yeah, I think that's, I hate to sound this way, but I think it's part of the plan. It's obvious that there's a plan here, whether there's a COVID virus or not, whether it's been weaponized or not. It is now being used as part of a political plan. And the first part of the plan, it seems to me, is to wreck the economy, because no incumbent ever gets elected when the economy has been wrecked. I think that's part of the plan. So you have the odd situation where the virus seems to be worse in states governed by Democrats. Why is this? Is it because Democrats have a weaker immune system? Or is it because they are using this as a political weapon? The classic state here is our neighboring state, Michigan, which has an attorney general who happens to be a lesbian, and a governor who views the people of Michigan as her enemy and denounces them for showing up at Lansing and demonstrating for an end to the lockdown. So you got this political. At this point, you start wondering: who's in charge? Is anybody in charge? Do these people have the power to wreck our lives for some type of political gain? Is what they're proposing actually calculated to deal with the virus, or is it simply the virus a pretext to impose the controls on us that they failed to impose a year ago? There's an interesting article in this regard. It was written by two professors from Harvard, and it was published in the Atlantic. And in this article, they said that the COVID virus was simply an extension of the internet battle of 2019, because both of them are a war against unwanted content. That was their phrase, unwanted content. Well, unwanted by whom? Well, unwanted by professors from Harvard, to give you one instance, because suddenly all of these mainline sources of information are being sidelined. And we have a huge battle once again between television and the internet. And it looks at this point now, maybe you've seen the same thing, but television is trying to keep up with the internet now. Mm-hmm. So we have one internet show after another, and immediately the next day there will be a story in the Washington Post saying, "No, this is fake news," or you'll have fact checkers going through the thing and saying, "No, this is wrong." It's a sign that
we have some stories along that line coming up.
Yeah, so it's a sign that they're losing control. But the bigger picture is anyone in control? And then you have to that becomes an ultimate question, which is there an ultimate control? Is God in control? Is he out there? Or, as Christian scriptures deal with this issue, with the parable of Jesus Christ in the boat. They're sailing across the lake and a storm comes up and Jesus Christ is asleep. He's sleeping during the storm. And finally they can't stand it anymore. They wake him up and they say, don't you care that we're all going to die? And at this point, he calms the storm and said, "Where is your faith?" Well, the problem is during a time of crisis, it always seems that as if God is asleep, as if Christ is asleep in the boat. And we tend to feel that we are at the mercy of these powers, these worldly powers, which the church fathers always interpreted as the devil, and the church, the boat as the church. And that's the situation. So, all right, I lost my job. I'm locked down. I'm going crazy. Is anyone in charge? And that's, I think, that's what I tried to address with this video, because I'm just out taking a walk and I run into this woman. I have no control over that. I had no control whatsoever over those circumstances. I could have taken, it's not to say I couldn't have had control. I could have walked in another direction. I could have left a half an hour earlier or later. And in all of those instances, I never would have run into this woman. And if I hadn't run into her, there's a possibility she might have jumped in the river. So there is a plan there. The plan brought us together at that moment. And at that point, it's not to say that anything was determined, because we both have free will. And so I could have simply said, "No, I don't have a cell phone," pushed her aside and kept on walking. Or the other part of it is, she could have simply said, "I'm going to kill myself," hopped over the railing and actually jump into the river. But neither of those things happened, because there was this interaction, and the interaction had a purpose. And it was my purpose.
You can still interact with people, even despite the COVID crisis.
Yes.
Yeah, and you might have even violated the 6-foot social distance limit.
I hate to admit this in front of the public, but I was closer to her than 6 feet.
Oh my gosh! Well, I hope they don't come and arrest you, Mike.
I hope they don't tell anyone. But anyway, at one point, it was raining out. I'm holding an umbrella. I'm talking to her. She's about 2 feet away from me.
2 feet.
At one point, she grabbed the umbrella. So she's grabbing the umbrella and she's yanking me toward the river, and I'm yanking her back. So we were in very close proximity at that point.
Well, I'm glad you didn't both end up in the river.
So am I. So am I. Because it was not a day to go swimming. Believe me, it was cold. The river was flooding. It was high. I don't know how far down it was. It looked like 50 feet. It could. I didn't have a tape measure, but
You don't want that. No, that's not.
I don't. And the other thing is, I went back the next day and I saw her footprints all over the ledge, and a lot of the footprints were only half footprints, which means her foot was halfway over. And then I looked down again, and I could see the bottom, the rocky bottom. So you only had about 3 feet of water there,
No,
and you
that's
would have
that's
hit
not
the
the place to go
bottom,
swimming.
and you would have been swept away by the current anyway. But it
Yeah.
didn't happen. It didn't happen.
Well, alhamdulillah. So, Mike, this raises the issue of the Corona crisis. There's so many parallels with 9/11, and I've been through a lot of them. I wrote an article at UNS about this: 9/11 truth, coronavirus truth. But one that I didn't really talk about in that article, which it comes to mind now, is the way that both really, in some ways, seem to be almost like engineered as propaganda against religion. With 9/11, we were told that religious people are fanatical, crazy, suicidal terrorists, and so we need to stick with secularism. And now we're told that anybody who's at all religious is against science. Science has all of the answers. Obey science. Go to jail if you don't obey science telling you to do this and do that. Stay in your house, etc., etc. And so here's a conflict between science and religion with this story in Chicago. The Romanian church congregations are opening up beginning tomorrow in violation of the lockdown order from Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Your thoughts?
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's coming down to a conflict between science and religion. Okay, this is not a new conflict. My latest book, Logos Rising, is in many ways a history of the conflict between science and religion. Who is in possession of ultimate reality? Well, right now, it's obvious who is in possession of ultimate reality. It is the state. And the state is in possession of ultimate reality because they have science on their side. And religion is it's a non-essential service that may make you feel good if you're a weakling, if you're kind of like a non-Nietzschean type of weakling, but it has no relationship to ultimate reality. And so the church simply has to follow what the scientist, the state says. Well, the problem here is that we've got conflicting scientists now. We got scientists telling us two different things. And at that point, well, what do you do then? And to get back to your original point about 9/11, what I think we're seeing here is a rise in consciousness as well. In other words, the conflict here between religion and science, I think, is much more overt now than it was with 9/11. The consequences, the imposition of controls, it's much more overt now than it was in 1907. I'm sorry, with 9/11. And also the pushback is much more dramatic than it was back then. So if you take a timeline, let's begin with Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, what was the pushback? Did anyone say that was a false flag operation? I don't think anyone said that at that point.
Yeah, if they did, they just whispered it to somebody they trusted.
And that had no part in public consciousness. If you go to Kennedy assassination, the trauma, the major trauma after that, did anyone say that it was a plot? Did anyone contradict Walter Cronkite when he said that it was the work of a lone deranged gunman?
Well, actually, very few people did, but they were immediately fired and deplatformed from the Nation magazine.
Right. And then if you go forward from that to 9/11, a much bigger reaction. And then to this point, which is almost an instantaneous battle from the beginning, a battle for the public mind from the beginning between the internet and television, between the mainstream media. And I think that the mainstream media are on the defensive. I think they're on the defensive now. Every article I read is basically referring to some internet thing, or the Atlantic article where these mandarins from our premier oligarchic institute, namely Harvard University, are complaining and spilling the beans at the same time by saying this is just another form of trying to get people under control.
Absolutely. And so it would have been interesting if Jesse Ventura had run for president in these circumstances, since he, to my mind, Mike, I know we probably disagree a little bit about this, but I don't have much use for Trump. To me, Trump is a fake populist, although he's an entertainer and shakes things up a little bit. But Jesse Ventura is more of an authentic populist with an actual, moral backbone, who has spoken truth about so many of these red pill issues. And at this moment, with this corona lockdown crisis going on, having Jesse Ventura as a third-party candidate would have been really interesting. So it's too bad. Once again, maybe his wife won the coin toss. He came on my radio show in 2008 and told me that his wife had won the coin toss, so he didn't run for president. And maybe that happened again. But it's too bad, because this kind of populism, people who don't trust the mainstream authorities, who are, as you say, are freaking out about the internet. It would have been great to have somebody like Jesse actually on TV providing even more pushback and making it even more interesting.
Yes. And what is the connection between Jesse Ventura and Donald Trump?
Well, Jesse Ventura is real. Donald Trump is a phony.
But they're both involved in wrestling.
There you go.
Professional wrestling. I don't know whether you ever saw that video, but there's this one video where Donald Trump comes up behind this guy and just slams him to the floor. I mean, I think he should have been in the ring with Jesse Ventura. But
that would have been fun. Yeah, another good reason why we should have had Jesse in the race. Oh well, things are still going to be pretty interesting as the political situation continues to deteriorate. So let's talk about Trump's security guys running Bay of Pigs 2 in Venezuela. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It is like a professional wrestling show. From where I sit in the seats, Trump is sort of the heavy, really. And here he has his personal security, ex-Green Beret, Jordan Goudreau, working with a retired Venezuelan army general facing U.S. narcotics charges, a bunch of drug runners going in to try to kill Maduro in Operation Gideon. And they all get caught, just like at the Bay of Pigs. So whose idea was this to have a new Bay of Pigs, Mike?
Was it Trump's? You tell me. I don't know. Was it, or was this guy his valet or whatever it is acting on his own? What's your story? What's your take on it?
I wouldn't be too surprised if there was some kind of understanding between Trump and his mafioso security about this. Like maybe it was the idea might have come from the security guys who say, hey, we could get this, a bunch of these exiles and stuff are going to give us $250 million to go try and kill Maduro. Would that be okay, Don? And the Don, gives him the nod. I wouldn't be too surprised if it went off like that.
But why would he spend that much money on such a mission impossible that was doomed to failure from the beginning? Why would he ever do that?
Well, but they're a bunch of gung-ho idiots. Why did they do the Bay of Pigs? Well, also the Bay of Pigs was designed to get Kennedy to send in the Marines. And so maybe they thought if they could have a big enough crisis with Trump's buddies locked up in prison in Venezuela, that would cause the Marines to get sent in. Anyway, Luke Denman was asked by the Venezuelans who commanded this Jordan guy, and Denman answered that Trump was the ultimate commander of this. So the guys who were captured are saying that Trump ordered it. And then in this RT story, we see that the assassination of Maduro was apparently the goal, or so the Venezuelans are telling us. And then in the next story from Veterans Today, where of course Trump is not very popular, it is alleged that Trump's private security, which he uses in place of the Secret Service for the first time since the Secret Service was established, is a kind of a mishmash of his original. The first security used as a business, quote unquote, businessman was from the Gambino crime family that poured his concrete, and he moved on to the Kosher Nostra and Bayrock. And these people, his private security, according to VT sources, haul his 12-year-old dates. I mean, Trump goes way back with Epstein and others of that ilk. He likes them young, as he said about Epstein, just like Epstein does. So you can't make this stuff up. Trump's pedophile procurers sent to Venezuela for a new Bay of Pigs operation. I mean, I'm a satirist, but I can't even come up with stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess this gives you some indication of how he feels about the Secret Service. If he feels that these people,
and I actually don't blame him about that. After what happened to JFK.
These people are his Praetorian Guard. It gives you some indication of how he feels about the Secret Service. Not a good recommendation for the Secret Service. I guess it depends on who you can trust. Who do you feel is loyal to you and who is not?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you read about the Secret Service in Dealey Plaza, you'd have to either, if you're a president, you probably would either do everything they tell you, or you would have to get some private security.
Well, you
So
have to. Every assassination depends upon being maneuvered into a particular position. And so what was true of John F. Kennedy, he had to be in a certain place at a certain time, and the only people who could do that were his own handlers. The same thing is true of Robert Kennedy, who got suddenly taken out the back door of that hotel in Los Angeles by his handlers. And it turns out that there were gunmen waiting there. I think that his son doesn't believe that it was Sirhan Sirhan was there to be apprehended, but it's not clear that he pulled the trigger.
no, it's clear. It's clear that Sirhan actually fired randomly and never hit Kennedy. Kennedy was killed from behind, point blank powder burn. So the gun was pressed up against his skull from behind, and Sirhan never got closer than maybe 10, 15 feet away from the front. So clearly, Sirhan didn't kill him.
Yeah, yeah. So, but the point here is he had to be put in that position by his handlers. There were people who were leading him out that door, and they are the ones who should have been interrogated during any type of investigation. But the fall guy was already there, and so that never happened.
So, Mike, are you suggesting that certain deep state forces, realizing they can't get rid of Trump the way they got rid of JFK because of the private security, the mafia private security, have decided to knock out the whole world with coronavirus? That's the only way they can get rid of Trump, is to unleash a pandemic and lock down the entire world and destroy the global economy. They must really hate Trump.
I think they do. I think that they, no matter what he's done, one way or the other, that they have been against him from the beginning. And it's Russiagate, and then it's the impeachment, and now it's the COVID virus. These are all attempts to get rid of Trump. I think that's obvious.
And I think there are actually good reasons why one would not want Trump as president, but that there are equally, if not better, reasons why one wouldn't want a lot of the other major party people as president too. In any case, let's move on to the medical murder category. Nicole Sirotek made a heart-rending video describing these people being killed, and not by coronavirus. They're being killed by doctors in the hospital where she works, including residents who don't have a clue about what they're doing, apparently, or if they do, they're psychopathic killers. Botched intubations, patients routinely denied blood transfusions that would have kept them alive, deadly injections of the wrong kind of insulin, refusal of life-saving antibiotics, and on and on and on and on and on. All these people are not dying of COVID, they're dying of iatrogenic illness. And in my new American Free Press piece, Do Doctors Kill More People Than COVID? I discussed these horrendous figures about, well, the low estimate is at least 250,000 Americans are dying every year from medical malpractice. That was a Johns Hopkins study. At least 400,000, according to another study. And then the top figure, the actual figure, according to a meta research project called Death by Medicine, is 783,936 people murdered, killed negligently by doctors every year, making doctors the leading cause of death in America. So much for scientific and medical authority, Mike.
Well, you're only going to add to that by disrupting the normal means of care in a situation. I think the lady was talking about, the nurse was talking about the situation in New York, where there was pressure to intubate the people who were coming in. Which is a dangerous procedure to begin with. It turns out that from what I've been hearing, it's the wrong treatment, because it's not that your chest or diaphragm can't contract. It's the fact that whatever is covering the covering, there's a covering on the inside of the lung, which makes it impossible for the blood to pick up oxygen through the normal procedure. So intubation is not going to help that. That is compounded by the fact that the nurses, according to what she said, are not going into the rooms after they intubate people. I know a friend who has a child who is intubated permanently because this child cannot move. He's simply paralyzed from the neck down and simply cannot breathe properly. And the instrument, the respirator, breathes for him. This is a situation where a small piece of phlegm or something like that can clog the tube, and you have an emergency that has to be dealt with within minutes, if not seconds. That has to be cleared, otherwise the person died. Well, if you've got all these people in a ward where the nurses are not going into the room, it seems clear that people are going to die. So as a kind of independent confirmation of this, I had a friend in Boston who told me that one of his colleagues, 68 years old, was taken to the hospital with coronavirus, intubated with 13 other people in a room, and 12 of those people died. Now, when that type of thing happens during a life-saving operation, you're forced to wonder whether it's the operation itself that is contributing to their death. This is the situation that has to be taken into account here.
Well, and that's what Nicole Sirotek is saying. She's saying that these intubations are almost death sentences, and she's getting these situations where she gets a patient, somebody signs off, and she has to go take a patient and goes in the room, and the patient is dead. Nobody knew it, and who knows how long they've been dead. So it sounds like they've almost got some kind of conveyor belt here, killing people off. And naturally, this is the hospital in New York for poor people and Black people and Hispanic people and working class people. It's not necessarily the same treatment that the wealthier people are getting. Another sign of the times here in America. So given the lack of trust in authority, which is of course amply justified, is it really that surprising that Americans are jumping on the coronavirus conspiracy theory bandwagon? The Atlantic magazine is panicking. You're talking about these pushback pieces from the mainstream, and here's one of them. And isn't it interesting how when they attack conspiracy theorists, they usually lead with the stupidest conspiracy theories, right? The COVID-19, Dean Koontz and the Mole Children, QAnon. They completely ignore the Ron Unz and Jeff Brown conspiracy theory of biowarfare here, anti-China biowar to prevent China from rising to #1 world power status, which is in virtually every case, the #1 power launches a preemptive war on the #2 power. So that U.S. is #1, China's #2. One would expect this would be a preemptive war by #1 against #2 that maybe got out of hand, as Ron Unz thinks. Or maybe it was planned that it would do this to totally retool the West as a surveillance state along the lines of China, as the lockstep project would suggest. In any case, there are much better conspiracy theories out there than QAnon, but we're getting the straw man treatment in this particular article.
Well, so yes, you're right. There is a situation where you've got two groups of people that basically cannot talk to each other. And there are basically two boxes that everything has to be put into. So the one box is science and the other box is conspiracy theories.
And religion is a conspiracy theory.
And that's it. So everything's got to fit into those two boxes, which means if you've got to break it up into little pieces and so on and so forth. So at this point, you need some type of adjudicating power. And I assume it's going to have to be the state. The state could step in and have an investigation. And there could be people who could be subpoenaed to testify by rule of law on the stand. If we just take a step back to 9/11, our special forces apprehended Osama bin Laden. They had him on the helicopter, evidently. And why didn't they put him on trial? Why didn't they put him on trial? That would have vindicated the United States as the paradigm of the rule of law in the world. But I think it would also have allowed people to cross-examine him and bring in evidence. And I don't think that's what they wanted there. I think the same thing is true now. There's only one group of people there's one group, let's say the Justice Department, that could hold investigations as to what actually happened in Wuhan. We may see a trial. Professor Lieber, the chairman of the chemistry department at Harvard, has been arrested for his collaboration with the Chinese government.
Well, Ron Unz thinks he was arrested because he knows this is a germ warfare attack on China.
Well, there's another angle too. He was invented a nano wire. Okay. Now this is used in genetic modification. So we know that this lady, the bat woman, Sheng Ji or whatever her name is, from Wuhan, was engaged in this type of thing, and that Fauci apparently paid for this type of outsourcing of this type of biowarfare. So are we going to have an investigation where people are going to have to give sworn testimony about what happened here? Because someone's got to clear up this this problem, resolve this impasse, because we have two groups of people that simply cannot talk to each other. Every time you bring up evidence, every time someone on the internet says something, someone at the Atlantic or Newsweek calls it fake news, or some guy who is a fact checker. Did you know that fact checkers were infallible?
Well, yes. If you looked at Snopes, the people running Snopes, they got caught pimping people or running a prostitution ring out of the Snopes office. Those are the fact checkers we're supposed to rely on.
Well, Mercola interviewed Dr. Mercola, the alternative medicine guy, interviewed Francis Boyle, who wrote the original biowarfare protocol, the law in the 70s, and he was immediately called. This was called fake news by a group called NewsGuard. Well, NewsGuard, it turns out, is a lobbying organization that basically takes money from big pharma and big tobacco to ensure that they don't get criticized in the media, and they get put positive articles in their behalf on the internet. Well, so we're back to the old saying, quis custodiet ipsos custodes. Who's going to fact check the fact checkers?
Yeah, absolutely. And so a huge example of this week was the Plandemic fiasco. Plandemic is a movie coming out in many episodes, and the first episode features Judy Mikovits, and she's apparently an AIDS research whistleblower, controversial, of course. And so, her point of view is expressed in this interview, which YouTube just is taking down as fast as it can be reposted. And the mainstream media is blasting out anti-Judy Mikovits propaganda. So, you can see both sides of the story if you can find the video, but you probably won't find it on YouTube because there are about 1,000 URLs where it's already been taken down. You're going to have to go to an alternative platform to see her side of the story. And that's what bothers me here, Mike, because I don't care if the Washington Post wants to run their side of the story. That's okay. I'll check that out. But I want to be able to hear the other side, too. And they're telling us, no, you shouldn't even see the other side. It's going to be deplatformed. Don't even look. And that's suspicious in its face, isn't it?
Yes. But I mean, we're always faced with this competing narratives, competing stories, and we always have to make judgments. I mean, this is the whole point of Logos. The whole point of the book that I wrote about Logos is that we have power the mind can achieve the truth. That we have that you don't need a degree in microbiology to make up your mind about things. And if you did, that would be the end of democracy. Because the whole point of a democratic government is that the people have the ability to reason. They have a kind of judgment that allows them to come to the truth, and that they can choose representatives that will represent their interest and make those decisions, even though they're not experts. Because if we don't, what's the alternative? Ruled by microbiologists? Well, even that doesn't work, because as you just mentioned, you got one microbiologist contradicting another microbiologist. Mm-hmm. And what do you do then?
You have to believe the one that the authorities tell you is right, I guess.
Well, that's true. That's the answer to the question.
That's the fallacy of
the microbiologist that has the most funding.
Yeah.
Truth is the opinion of the powerful. Truth is the opinion of the microbiologist who has the most funding.
And of course, that's the classic fallacy called appeal to authority. And that is a fallacy in logical reasoning, but it seems to be the dominant fallacy that we're forced to live under. Well, let's move on to some other corona conspiracy takes. Sputnik argues that the new Cold War smear campaign against China, pushed by the U.S. trying to deflect the blame for its failure to curb the virus. So that's one take. And frankly, again, I see this historically as a typical case of the number one power probably launching a preemptive strike against the number two power at one level. And then at the second level, the depopulation folks very well maybe actually happy that 250 million people around the world are going to die from the economic effects of this. So here's the Sputnik gives us kind of the pro-Chinese side, which we're not supposed to pay attention to. And then there's the DARPA, the DARPA breakthrough story. DARPA says that they're going to have a brand new blood test anytime now that can detect COVID immediately, one day after it's contacted, 2 weeks before the symptoms show up. So DARPA has a head start here in testing, perhaps because they created the virus. What do you think, Mike?
Yes, that's the question that has to be answered. And someone in a position of authority is going to have to intervene here and try and answer this question, because it's been so long since we've had any type of investigation of this sort. The government is now lost its authority. The whole FBI has lost its authority because it's been politicized to prevent the election of people who are not acceptable to the oligarchs. At some point, someone's going to have to resurrect government as an honest broker here. That's going to have to happen.
Nice. Yeah.
When is it going to happen? Because if it doesn't happen, what you're seeing over this period of time is the erosion of trust. People don't trust anyone anymore. They don't trust, and when they don't trust, then they're going to have to find someone they can trust, and then so the people who are suppressing the debate are cutting their own throats here. You've had what is it called? The Polish firing squad, where you've got people, the media attacking Trump and Trump attacking the media, and they're both destroying each other. The reputation of the presidency is declining just as fast as the reputation of the mass media that's attacking him.
And the propaganda war here between the U.S. and China is getting pretty hot now. It's definitely heating up this week. Here's the China lied about coronavirus story, which they've been hammering this for a while. And now there's a leaked intelligence report supporting it. And of course, that's being countered by China in the video Once Upon a Virus, a very popular Chinese side of the story video. And of course, interestingly, China doesn't mention the stories from ABC News, from Israel and elsewhere. I think NBC also confirmed it, that the U.S. knew that a huge pandemic was brewing in Wuhan in November, which was before the Chinese knew it. So that, if that is confirmed, that pretty much proves this is a U.S. germ warfare attack on China, doesn't it? I would think. And finally, there's the global perspective. The Atlantic tells us that the world is laughing at Trump. So this is terrible for U.S. power. This is terrible for America's reputation in the world, that a clown like Trump is fronting for the United States, the supposed global hegemon and leader. But the foreigners at least say that Trump is fun. In this time of darkness and depression, he keeps us entertained, said an Italian Trump fan. So China, meanwhile, is moving into Italy and the Arab world, buying up distressed businesses. And if this was a bio attack on China, as Ron Unz thinks, a botched one, it'll go down in history as the worst case of shooting yourself in the foot ever.
Yes. But the question is, let's say, go back to the beginning. No one was allowed to say that this was a bioweapon at a certain point. This was the official story. There was an escape from the wet market in Wuhan. And anybody who said that it was a bioweapon was a conspiracy theorist. Well, then that story started to creep out of the conspiracy theory box, and it started edging its way toward science. And at that point, I think that the CIA took control of the story, saw some profit, some merit, using it as a way of attacking China. So Pompeo then lent legs to the story by saying that they were looking into this thing. The question is, would anyone believe Pompeo if he told you whatever his story was? This is a man who bragged about saying how he lied when he was in the CIA.
Yeah, we lied, we cheated, we stole.
That's right. So are you going to, it's like, are you going to believe a man who tells you that he's a liar? It's like,
and brags about it.
This is like the man from Crete who said that all men are liars. All Cretans are liars. Well, was he telling the truth when he said that all Cretans were liars, or was he lying to us? You see part of the crisis here. Who's going to adjudicate? Who's going to resolve these issues? They keep saying that they're going to resolve. This fallback position is power. truth is the opinion of the powerful. But what happens when people don't believe the powerful? Then what? What do you do then?
Well, we're finding out, I think. So we're hearing all different sorts of different stories, not only about, was it the U.S.'s fault? Of course, they never allow that to be printed in any Western media. Or was it China's fault? And of course, that is okay. You can print that. They're also arguing about, is it worse than we thought, or is it actually much more innocuous than we thought? Is it killing fewer people? Is it less lethal? Is it more lethal? Is it less contagious? Is it more contagious? Latest scare story this week, it's more contagious. There's been a spike protein mutation, and now there's a new variety, a mutant variety of coronavirus, attack of the mutant coronavirus, that's more contagious than the extremely contagious normal variety of coronavirus. So that sounds pretty bad. So Mike, which is it? Is it worse than we thought, or is it not so bad as we thought?
Well, let's assume that this was a biological warfare attack on China initiated by the United States. How would you know whether China retaliated?
Yeah, that's a good point.
How would you ever know if this is really warfare? How do you know that what happened in, let's say, New York isn't a retaliation for what happened in Wuhan? How are you going to know?
Yeah.
And how are we going to know? And how are we going to manage this? Because this is now, we're in this phase where certain countries are easing up on the lockdown, but then maybe the plan is to simply clamp down harder by saying, we told you so. We're seeing this now in Germany, for example. Germany, their protests took place a while back, I think around Easter. The people went out into the streets in Berlin, all across the place. There was a woman, a lawyer, Beate Bonner, who organized it. She got arrested and subjected to Guantanamo-like incarceration in Germany. And then Angela Merkel suddenly says, oh, yeah, well, we're going to ease the restrictions. Well, so this is Angela Merkel recognizing as a politician that she has to get out of this, in front of this political movement, because the train's going to leave the station without her. But maybe that's just a ploy anyway. So we'll let loosen the things, and then we'll suddenly have this miraculous spike in infections and deaths. And then she'll be able to turn around and say, I told you so. You should have listened to me in the first place. And now we're going to clamp down even harder. How do we know this is not going to happen? How do we know?
See that coming. Yeah, no, you see that coming, because the normal infectious disease pattern would suggest that there should be a bigger wave coming, very likely in the fall. And they will be saying, yeah, we told you so, we're going to have to clamp down harder. I mean, that's all unfortunately pretty predictable, as the next story tells us. This new report, and this is not new. I mean, my good friend of mine who's a doctor and pretty well versed on epidemiology told me this back in, I think, January. Basically, he had he basically described exactly what was going to happen by late January, early February. But now they're printing it in the press that this is going to go on for 2 years. It won't stop until 60 to 70% of the population has developed immunity. And there won't be a vaccine, because there are no vaccines for this kind of thing, no effective ones anyway. And so we'll see 18 to 24 months of these waves where it gets worse, and then it gets better, and then it gets worse. That's just what's going to happen. It is going to get worse. We better be ready for it. And they're going to tell us, we told you so. We need to lock you down even worse.